Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. The Prime Minister faces JIT today. He appears before the JIT. He faces the judiciary. He faces the judicial process head on. It is certainly a historic day. Let's talk about what it means for the democratic process, what it means for political maturity in Pakistan, what it shows to our other political parties and certainly to the world also. I have with me today Zaid Gishkori Sahab, who is a senior journalist. Thank you for joining us today. Zegam Khan Sahab, senior analyst, thank you for being with us today. Zaid Sahab, to start off with you, certainly, you know, and I think this is an all-round opinion that it is a historic day in the sense that the Prime Minister going to the JIT, submitting himself, you know, to the judicial process, to the will of the Supreme Court. It's certainly a historic day in that way. In your opinion, how do you see this development for our democratic process, our political process, our democracy, you know, which is certainly not very old in Pakistan?
Thank you, Mahrukh. Yes, no doubt, it seemed to be a very historic day for the country, for democracy as well. There's an elected Prime Minister, particularly the third time elected Prime Minister, appeared before the joint investigation team probing Panama Leaks case. So it's a good omen. Not only he is appearing, but also his younger brother is also going to appear, and certainly the whole family. His two sons as well already have been
and his son, I think 7 times he's appeared.
One is Hussain NAWAZ appeared before JIT 5 times and twice the younger son. So it's a good omen, and good omen for the accountability as well, that the sitting head of the government is also appearing before the investigators. So history unfortunately has not been very good for the state, for the democracy, because unfortunately, look at General Pervez Musharraf example. It's a broad example. He never been, and he has been just appearing, not appearing before investigators in many cases. And one example is his case is still pending with the Shariat court. It's on breaching the Constitution of Pakistan. So he just was.
And we've seen different you know, ploys being used. You know, it is being said that, you know, he was not well, his health was an issue, among other things. You know, not only with Musharraf Sahab, but with other leaders of the country also. You know, so in that sense, it is certainly commendable that the Prime Minister didn't use any of these ploys or any of these what can we call, you know, these methods to avoid submitting himself before the JIT.
Yeah, I agree to you, because he has been beating about the bush that he is not well. He even ultimately fled away from the country. But yes, this government let him to go. This is another question. But secondly is that another example we can quote here, in the last government, elected government of Pakistan People's Party, Prime Minister at that time, Yusuf Raza Gilani, also has been appearing before the apex court, and also Raja Pervez Ashraf as well. But these two cases were different. Now this is a history, but now a lot of questions being raised on the fair accountability and fair trial by the investigation team. A lot of questions being raised on its fairness. So we don't know that's what be happening. But
let's come back and talk about that also. Let me take Zegam Saab's opinion. Zegam Saab, you know, it is true that there are, like I said, that it is a historic day in the sense that the Prime Minister has gone, and he has, you know, without a protocol, it is said that, you know, he went and he submitted himself between the judicial process, you know, and he's allowed himself to be investigated. His family, like Zaid Saab is saying, has also submitted themselves, his sons and his brother, and, you know, who is also the Chief Minister at the time. It certainly sets a different tone for the politics of this country, and it's certainly a slap in the face of all the rhetoric of people being in the power, being able to avoid the judicial process, and certainly being in a position to do so and yet not choosing to do so.
Well, Mahrukh, I think there are two ways to look at this situation. One is the positive one. Of course, democracy. We have a democracy, and in democracy, our elected representatives, our elected leaders are accountable to the court of law and to the court of people. And we have seen that Prime Minister has submitted himself to the court first and to the court process as well. He did not invoke the question of jurisdiction, and he did not invoke his immunity as the elected Prime Minister. Though we see that there is a lot of acrimony between the Pakistan Muslim League and the JIT as a committee. Well, it's good to that extent, and it is not possible, as my friend Gishkori mentioned, in a dictatorship. It's very difficult to bring a dictatorship before a court, even after he is not ruling the country. That is true. But I think there is also another side to this coin.
Right.
And the other side is this whole process also shows a relative failure of our ruling political elite. See, we have this process because the institutions of accountability failed to do their work, and this whole issue reached the Supreme Court. And it is not the normal process. It should have come before a normal court of law. But because...
But it did come between, to the Supreme Court.
To the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court took it up as an issue of basic human rights, which is an unusual situation. It's not a trial court. So it should have been, ideally, it should have been dealt with the institutions of accountability like FIA, NAB, SCCP. Those are the kind of institutions who should have been dealing with this case, not the Supreme Court. But because the political parties, particularly those who were taking up this course, they did not have trust in those institutions. And the government and the opposition, of course, together, they failed to reform the institutions of accountability, as was promised, for example, by PMLN and People Party, that instead of NAB, they would come up with a new institution of accountability. And they had also promised in the Charter of Democracy that they would set up a new constitutional court. So that would have made things simpler, but because it was a failure at that level, it reached first the Supreme Court.
So that's an interesting thing that you're saying. There's been a lot of criticism about the fact that certainly the JIT also comprises of officials of a certain cadre, of a certain level, and certainly the Prime Minister with his own he's the Prime Minister of the country, he holds certain position in the country, certainly, the Premier of the country. In your opinion, do you think that the investigation, you've just mentioned the FIA, and I'll go to Zaid Saab on this later also, but in your opinion, like the FIA, the NAB, officials of these institutions have not, in your opinion, have failed, and therefore we are where we are with the JIT.
True.
In your opinion, do you think that the officials of the JIT will succeed where they have failed, considering that they are also, at that same level, if not, more or less speaking from that perspective?
I see weakness, you can even call it failure, in the fact that it is an extraordinary arrangement. And we are unclear about the laws and rules under which this whole JIT is functioning. See, the PMLN has raised this question as a lawyer. It's a first of sorts, and it is not an institution. It's an extraordinary one-time arrangement.
But it's the Supreme Court.
It is Supreme Court, and even Supreme Court has not made it clear under which law the JIT has been formed. For example, we don't know who carries the burden of proof. Well, on whom lies the onus of proof? Whether the Prime Minister and his family has to prove their innocence, or whether it is the job of the prosecution to prove that they did something wrong. We simply don't know, because NAB law works in one way, and our normal laws work differently. So there are different sets of laws, and we are not clear under which law JIT is functioning. So there are many grey areas here. And then I think it's important that both the parties should have trust on the people who are running the JIT. I see there are some snags, there are some problems, I think, but all parties should wait and see
But Zegam Saab, you know, let me just come back to you. Zaid Saab, you know, like in this discussion that we're having, Zegam Saab has said that, you know, both parties should have confidence in the judicial, in the people, certainly going into the inquiry, certainly the investigating officers, certainly JIT also. But we've seen the opposition lose confidence wherever in the past, you know, if we look back, especially with the PTI, we've seen that, you know, there are instances where they feel that they're not succeeding, and you know, this is a criticism which is has been coming out on from the government side, that they then say that they don't have confidence in the particular institution that is doing the investigation, whether it's the High Court, whether it's the Supreme Court, whether it's the Election Tribunal. In your opinion, hasn't that been the normal practice? Right now, of course, they have expressed confidence in the JIT.
I think it's a very complicated thing, because I have been covering this Panama case from the day first. Supreme Court has been hearing this case a long 4 months, but finally 2 judges gave their opinion. 3 said that no, still we reserve our opinion, and JIT should investigate this matter within 60 days. But I see that as JIT also sought more time, because now there seemed to be a new battle in Supreme Court of Pakistan between the respondent, I mean the Sharif family, and the JIT, because JIT sort of leveled very serious allegations.
We've been joined by Miftah Ismail Saab from the PMLN. Thank you for joining us. Miftah Saab, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yes, you know, certainly it's a huge development for, like we were earlier talking about, for the democratic process for the country, that the Prime Minister himself appeared before the JIT, and he went there without protocol, and he submitted himself to the judicial process. How does the PMLN look at it?
Well, I mean, Prime Minister has always maintained that his politics is not about power, but it's about values. You know, that the Prime Ministership himself today said the Prime Ministership is not important, Pakistan is important. So whatever we need to do to strengthen democracy in Pakistan, to entrench democracy in Pakistan, we will do. And if that means that we have to go in front of JIT, as the Supreme Court has desired, so the Prime Minister went, like you said, without protocol. I mean, although the Prime Minister could have asked the JIT to appear in front of him, to appear at the Prime Minister's office. And I'll tell you that even after 9/11, when U.S. investigators were doing investigation, they went and met with President Bush at the White House. When President Clinton was being investigated on the Monica Lewinsky situation, again, the investigators went to the White House. But even that courtesy, we were not extended, nor did we ask for that. The Prime Minister went to the JIT, and again, if we look at our history, I mean, we've had previous dictators who actually had...
there is a lot of talk from the opposition primarily about the motives of the Prime Minister. You know, they're saying that it was done to gain political mileage, and you know, it was done to gain brownie points as far as the political side of things is concerned. What can you tell us about that?
So there is no way. I mean, if the Prime Minister doesn't go to the JIT, then they'll say, well, he's obstructing justice. If he does go in, then he'll say, well, he's doing a political posturing. What is the winning position here? The fact is that the Prime Minister said for the last 1.5 years that he is ready to face any accountability, that he actually wrote a letter to the Supreme Court to form a commission, which the Supreme Court at that point wrote a very intemperate letter back and decided not to form a commission. Then they were, when there was a trial under the Jamali court, they offered Imran Khan the option of having a commission. He refused. If you remember, that was last December. Then in this year again, they've come up with this thing, and 3 distinguished judges of the High Court, Supreme Court have decided there's going to be a commission. We presented ourselves in front of the commission, even though there are lots of questions now about the commission's behavior, formation. There were WhatsApp calls that have been admitted that there were WhatsApp calls. Now the commission has admitted that Mr. Hussain Nawaz picture was released from within its staff members. We know that there were witnesses in the commission, including Mia Nawaz Sharif's cousin, the elderly gentleman, Mia Tariq Shafi. They were sort of pressurized to either rescind what their earlier statements, or write become a prover against the Prime Minister. They were threatened with 14 years or 16 years of imprisonment. These are not things which are done in a proper, impartial investigation. And what we are maintaining, what we are requesting is that not only should justice be done, it should be seen to be done, this has to be a very above board investigation. Muslim League nonetheless will cooperate with the investigation in any way it can, because we believe in the rule of law.
In his speech outside, he said it was a very heartfelt speech in which he said that, the 3 generations of the, his 3 generations had been subjected to this scrutiny, and they had submitted themselves, his family also. Do you think that, of course, there is talk that the Chief Minister, his brother, Mian Shahbaz Sharif, will be called. Do you think the Prime Minister is likely to be called again? And will he be going again to the JIT if he is called indeed?
I have no idea if the Prime Minister will be called again. I would have thought that the JIT, having called him at such a late stage, will have all the prepared questions. He is, after all, the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Just the day before yesterday, he was in Saudi Arabia trying to mediate between Saudi and Qatar. He has more important things to do, or many other important things to do. But I don't know whether they'll call him again.
And do you think, and in what kind of a precedent do you think it sets for the world, internationally? Do you think, how will the world look at the fact that, our elected Prime Minister is being submitted to this sort of scrutiny, this sort of investigation in the world? How do you think the world will look at this?
No, I mean, nobody is above the law, and if the law requires that the Prime Minister of Pakistan go to the investigation, he should go, and he did. This is what we've believed in. This is not like, we've had, dictators in Pakistan who actually, all of a sudden get a backache on the way to the court and go to a hospital. This is not like this. Nawaz Sharif is a man who believes in democracy, who believes in the rule of law, and he'll go to JIT, and if he's asked again, he will again comply. But the point is that there is no case of corruption against Nawaz Sharif. This is what I think the rest of the world is wondering. They are talking about the private business of Nawaz Sharif and his father and his son. And JIT has asked for the income tax returns of Mian Sharif from 1970. I'm not making this up. They've actually asked for income tax returns from 1970. What are they trying to do? This is a fishing expedition where they're trying to fish for something. The fact of the matter is that there is not even an accusation against Nawaz Sharif or any of his ministers or anybody in his family of taking any kickbacks, any bribes, any commission from any local or foreign company. Neither in this 9 years that we've been in power in Punjab or 4 years in federal government this time or in the 2 previous times. And Pervez Musharraf Sahab subjected him to every sort of scrutiny while he was in jail and then in exile, and yet nothing came. There was not one case of financial corruption that was stuck against Nawaz Sharif even then, and so that nothing will be happening now. So, I mean, this is just a fishing exercise, but we are happy to go through it.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us, Miftah Saab. Thank you for giving us your time. In your opinion, Zaid Saab, like Miftah Saab is saying, according to the PMLN, it's certainly a fishing expedition, and the fact that, he has said that income tax records from, 1970s have been recalled by the JIT, and certainly, in your, what do you think about the fact that certainly there is some sense in what is being said, in the sense that, certainly the PMLN and the Sharif family was subject to a lot of investigation even under President Musharraf, after the coup and everything, and yet nothing did come out of that also.
That's very interesting, Mahrukh. I myself is really surprised that Supreme Court just asked JIT that keep focus on 4 flats only. But now, so far, different persons have been summoned by JIT, like Captain Safdar. He has also been summoned by JIT. He has nothing to do with this whole process, because the investigation has been expanded, in my opinion. Within 60 days, it's almost impossible. Some sort of document have been reportedly irrelevant document. I mean, the investigation to question, to Mian Shahbaz Sharif and many other persons like Mr. Rahman Malik, they are keeping focus on Hudaybiyah Papers Mill, just trying to linking the dots. And there were also reports that JIT is also in search of some sort of approvers within the institution. And JIT also submitted, I was talking about the new battle in the Supreme Court that leveled serious allegation against the institution that they are just changing the record. So they are not cooperating JIT like major institution, as Begum Saab pointed out, that SECP, NAB, FPR, Federal Investigation Agency, State Bank of Pakistan. So all these 5 institutions, I don't know that either will they be able to get some sort of all these details, either they be able to interview Qatari prince, because this is also has been a very dangerous zone.
So certainly the ambit of the investigation, you know, it is difficult. Like Begum Saab was earlier saying, one, the rules are not very clear, because it's a one-off. It's a one, you know, it's a different situation where a commission is doing it under the auspices of the Supreme Court. You know, the Supreme Court is actually looking into it.
This is very point, because Supreme Court also has taken up this case under Article 1843, and that's why this has been pointed out by the council representing, I mean, Sharif family. They have been telling the Supreme Court that Supreme Court cannot investigate this sort of Panama thing, because it's not an investigation agency.
Right.
It should be investigated by the institution.
Right.
So that's why I think it's a very sort of special situation. We still don't know, as Begum Saab was telling, that under which laws this JIT was empowered, formed, because
and certainly, like Begum Saab was saying, we don't know where the burden of proof lies exactly.
Supreme Court has telling us in the whole proceeding, because you know that 115 long hour proceeding went on in the court, that lawyers were just telling the court from the respondent that burden of proof on the complainant at the opposition political party like PTI and other political parties. In my opinion, they also did not do something extraordinary. They did not submit sufficient proof. Otherwise, they could have done good job to bring some evidence or documentary proof. They could not. But Supreme Court judgment came out with 3-2, and then now JIT, a lot of questions are being raised on JIT. I don't know that what will be its outcome, but Prime Minister at least cooperating with JIT, no matter different opinions and criticisms and remarks being passed by other PMLN leaders, but the Sharif family so far cooperating it. This is a good omen.
Right. Let me go to Begum Saab. In your opinion, you know, how is the opposition looking at it? Certainly, they're saying that, you know, it's a victory for them. Yeah, and you know, the fact that they have gotten to where we are today with the Prime Minister going to JIT and submitting himself, and they're saying that it's a victory for the opposition. In your opinion, how do you see that?
I don't know if it is a victory for opposition, but oppositions certainly wants to use it for their own political ends. So we are clearly, we can see two things. First is judicialization of politics. So politicians are trying to get their political gains, to make political gains through a judicial process. And we see that throughout the Panama process in the court, more than the court, it was the media and the public to which the whole case was being addressed. So it was more a political case than a judicial case. And the second trend that we see is, you see that we are becoming more and more backward-looking people in politics and also in life.
That's an interesting thing. How do you mean?
You see, it is a time when we should be looking forward. We should go for a new beginning. But as you say, 1970s, 1980s, particularly 1990s, mired in 1990s particularly. I see a bit of problem with the ruling party as well. You know, when democracy was revived in Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto came with this idea of national reconciliation, that we should draw a line somewhere, and by law, we should make it difficult for any institution to go back. So it means both the parties, all political parties, I mean in all over the world, in constitutional democracies, in advanced democracies, cases are barred after a period.
In a sense it's retrospective when we go back.
I mean, how long can you go into the past? You see, you have to put a line somewhere. You cannot go into 1970s. You cannot even go into 1990s. Otherwise, you're always mired into the past. I think this is something which has not been done. Perhaps politicians to do it.
This was something, I mean, this was a relative consideration, or perhaps in your opinion, it should have been a consideration for the Supreme Court also. That, you know, we are, like you're saying, we're going backward and backward. And this can be, you know, is something that can be repeated whichever party comes into power.
Certainly, it's very counterproductive, I think, in the JIT process. Also, in the Supreme Court, you can go as back as for example, the Sharif family was in power.
Right.
How can you go, you see, in a period when they were not in power?
Right.
Usually, if you are a taxpayer, the tax authority don't ask you any question about your income or your taxes that were older than 5 years, for example. Right. They don't keep even records of your tax matters that are older than 5 years. I think this should have been a consideration. They should remain focused on the case, as Gishkori Saab said, and the case is about these 4 flats owned by the Sharif family and the money trail.
In your opinion, it's losing that focus, it's losing that focal point.
I do think JIT is losing the focus, and by losing the focus, we see there is a kind of controversy emerging over this whole issue, which is counterproductive. It should be seen to be fair.
But in your opinion, you know, and if that does happen, which we certainly hope that it doesn't, then their ruling, whichever ruling that they come up with, can become controversial also.
It will become controversial because there is politics behind it. One party is going to celebrate and other is going to cry foul. I think it should be carried out in a way that no party is able to raise objection over its fairness.
Right. Right, which is what happened with the Supreme Court ruling.
Which is Supreme Court ruling. Nobody was able to raise any objections. It was a thorough process. If you are unable to prove, you are unable to prove. Right. Why do you want to prove something at any cost? And I don't think the accused should have, the burden of proof should be put on the accused. Nobody in a justice system can be asked to bring proof against themselves.
Exactly.
It's job of the prosecution, it's job of the accuser to come up with the proof.
Right. Let's see what Zaid Saab has to say about that.
Mahrukh, I just want to point out one more thing here, that I'm not a law expert, but I have been covering Supreme Court, that this case has been taken up under Article 1843.
Right.
It's one of the biggest investigation in country history.
Right.
That the top people and top men is being prosecuted here. So in case they lost the case, in case, just suppose, they don't have the right to go into appeal in this case, because it has very broader political perspective and result and consequences for the Prime Minister as well, because it's a unique case. It's in a broader accountability. Our institution, JIT, is being empowered by Supreme Court of Pakistan, and Supreme Court also just keeping an eye and supervising it, that in case JIT gives finding against Sharif family, which already pointed out its impartiality, its fairness, because one of JIT members has also been an investigating officer in Hudaybiyah Papers Mill in 2000. This mere a coincidence whatsoever, but they have the right to point out on the members' impartiality, and Supreme Court is looking into it because the judgment has been reserved about the photo leakage, because this was also a very important point. Today, Prime Minister statement has also been recorded. It's a video recording, and you never know, it can come out any time, and its political consequences not only at the national level but also at international level could just spark a new fire in the country. I don't know that because this is very important point. JIT admitted that one of a person who was working as government official in Judicial Academy, he leaked this footage.
Right.
And they admitted that, and we don't know what decision is coming out on this, but at least it happened here, and that's why the ruling party was pretty right at this issue. But other point is different. this is very important,
right,
that if a sitting Prime Minister is facing such kind of prosecution and appearing before investigation team, then why not other person? There should be across the board accountability needed here, right time, because there are very high profile cases being pended with National Accountability Bureau and other courts like former military dictator General Musharraf, and like NICL case, 3 star generals are accused in this case, but they are not cooperating with the bodies, and like Mehran Gate case, that's the 2 4-star generals admitted that yes, they distributed the amounts among political parties, but they did not cooperate it. So,
and they did not
if the politician,
the kind of accountability that the Prime Minister today is facing, why haven't we been able to do that, in your opinion?
Can you repeat it?
Right, you're saying that, you know, we were talking about the certain generals. You mentioned certain instances where, you know, they haven't faced the kind of accountability that the Prime Minister is facing today. You know, and he mentioned his 3 generations. He mentioned all of his families facing, you know, this prosecution or this investigation, if not prosecution. And why haven't we been able to establish that kind of across the board accountability, in your opinion?
Mahrukh, this is very important. Unfortunately, I as a journalist see something is cooking wrong behind the scene, whole scene. They are making some sort of invisible things. I don't know about the forces, but everybody knows it, that what is going to happen, because look at JIT, a plea which was submitted with Supreme Court of Pakistan, only 8 pages, there is a prayer where they just express their anxieties and concern, but 110 pages are consisting of media monitoring all sort of things. These are only 6 members. I don't know that how they are monitoring this media, because everybody is tweeting. If somebody is tweeting,
what kind of media monitoring do you mean?
Media monitoring means if somebody is tweeting about JIT or Supreme Court decision or something,
that is being monitored.
Who is supporting it?
Right.
Because this is a question, very important question, and the person who was not named in the investigation report done by JIT, that who leaked this video, he was not named. I think there should be something may be wrong, something they want to hide. Who is supporting them?
Right.
Are there any invisible force here? But the issue is everything should be fair and open.
Right, of course.
Because there should be no question about it, and that's why it's I need, and I think so. There is a pressing need for across the board accountability, not only prosecute politicians or elected members of the parliament, but also prosecute other retired military generals as well, who have been accused in different cases.
Right, of course, and certainly if the Prime Minister of the country is being you know, investigated in such a manner, why not anybody else? And there shouldn't be.
That's why I endorse Begum Saab's point of view that institutions should be strengthened, empowered, and who will empower them? Of course, the sitting government is supposed to do that. We don't know that when they will be empowering them or not, because all are facing and sort of struggle.
Well, the sitting government is certainly submitting themselves to the investigation. Begum Saab, in your opinion, you know, like Zahid Saab is saying about other institutions, other areas, other people, you know, other personalities that should also be investigated in the same shape and manner, and, you know, across the board accountability. Imran Khan Saab, you know, today in his statement, he said he lashed out against the Prime Minister again, and he said that, you know, the Prime Minister means the judiciary and the army when he talks about, you know, other forces, and he talks about you know, in his investigation into this matter. It's certainly something that is, again, not politically mature of him. In your opinion, how do you see this?
Well, I agree with you. This whole process or the habit of judicialization of politics is very counterproductive. And it is harmful for the democratic process. It's harmful for all political parties and for all politicians. If Imran Khan thinks that he can use institutions in this way against the current government, and he won't be harmed
I mean,
by the similar process.
This is part of a political rhetoric, you know, that he's had since the beginning about third forces and all. I mean, we've seen that before also. I mean, this is not the first time that he said this.
Exactly. From the very beginning, for the last 4 years, he has used every means to pull down the government.
Right.
And he had tried to invoke the referee and the third employer throughout the process. And he wanted to throw down the government, to pull down the government, whatever the means. First, he tried to use the empire against the government, and then judiciary. Judiciary was not his first choice,
right, of course,
because he thought judiciary was not that powerful. But as a last resort, he went to the judiciary, and the only thing that he wants from judiciary is to oust the prime minister.
Right.
And I think this judicialization of politics is not a good thing, it's counterproductive. But it is there. This is something that should have been resolved within the parliament. They should have found out a way to solve this process through the institutions, not by invoking 184.3.
Right.
184.3 is not a proper mechanism to investigate such a case. But as for the across-the-board accountability, I think across-the-board accountability is very important.
Right,
but you don't need a different kind of institution for that. And you need a different kind of law for that. That is something which was promised in the Charter of Democracy, that the two parties, that is People's Party and PMLN, that remained in a large majority between 2008 and 2013, they should have formed a new institution. They failed to do it, and again, now the PMLN, People's Party and PTI, they failed to agree
right.
on a new law and a new institution. And as a result, we have seen that they have reached the Supreme Court. As Gishkuri Saab said, Supreme Court is the final court of appeal.
Right,
so if you start a case from the final court of appeal, then where do you go from there? It simply means that you have no right to appeal,
right.
which is again an infringement of your basic right. You get your first verdict
right,
that comes against you, that is the last verdict.
The last instance, of course.
Exactly.
And you don't have any other forum to go to.
Very true.
Exactly. Zaid Saab, quickly, you know, my last question to you. In your opinion, how do you see the opposition's reaction today?
I think they were very happy. They said that we have been struggling for it, and today Prime Minister appeared before GIT. But overall, it's fine. They have their right, and they're very happy.
But again, embroiling, like we were earlier talking about, you know, bringing, embroiling judiciary and bringing the army into it, like Imran Khan has been known to do in the past also, by saying third forces, umpire and all of that. That certainly clouds what is a historic, day in terms of the Prime Minister going to the JIT. It certainly is something that is not going to set the right tone for even this sort of investigation. Isn't that true?
I see it as a positive
political
sign.
You think it's
a positive
political
sign for democracy, for the country, because first of its example in the history. And I see it a very positive thing. And we were talking about accountability and opposition parties as well. I don't see any accountability the PTI introduced in KPK where it's ruling, because their accountability system is paralyzed. Even they could not bring the new chief of Accountability Bureau in the province. So it's just a sort of a separate debate. But this is a positive sign. We should take it positively, and I hope so that this fair process will set a new example.
And that it's certainly fair for everyone.
For everyone and across the board accountability.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Zaid Saab. Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for being with us, Begum Saab. Thank you for your valued opinion. Certainly, it is a historic day, and no one can change that, whether it's the PTI, whether it's the opposition, whether it's any other force, so to speak. It is a historic day for the country in the sense the Prime Minister of Pakistan bows to the judiciary, bows to the JIT, he bows to a judicial process where he submits himself, his family have submitted themselves in the past. Like he said, 3 generations of his are being held accountable. Every little their whole family is being investigated. So certainly it is a historic day, and it is certainly certainly a huge step forward as far as democracy is concerned, where we as a country are moving forward. It is certainly a huge step for political maturity, and I think that if nothing else, that is something that everyone should concede to. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.